I think, and I could be wrong, that this is the first episode that the COVID production issues rear their ugly heads. Producer Matt Strevens would like us to watch this without thinking, well, but they made this during the pandemic. But this is truly impossible with the accompaniment of seriously bad writing this era is plagued with. It looks like they accidentally admitted to this in an article by the Radio Times. Just to recap for those at the back that don't know exactly what has happened with the production of this series, filming was delayed due to the director of BBC Wales putting a halt on productions whilst social distancing measures were mandatory last year. Having different COVID rules in England and Wales also made production difficult. Overseas filming was obviously not given the green light, and upon realising this, I now see the allure of making something serialised like Classic Who, and having the Sontarans looking the way they do. What I'm imagining has happened is that the showrunners had an episode set during the Crimean War with the Sontarans and Mary Seacole that was originally set to be a singular episode without other connections. Most of the episode consists of that, with the overarching narrative glittering the rest of it up with the Flux appeal. The episode opens with a reminder of what happened in the previous one, which in turn reminded me of how the Halloween special hypes itself up like Series 6 did 10 years ago. The Doctor has another vision this week, being drawn to the shrieking shack floating in the sky. The gang woke up in the middle of the Crimean War, where I realised I literally had no real knowledge about this conflict whatsoever. Apparently, the British and Russian empires weren't exactly agreeable in the middle of the 19th century. I say that because of the Anglo-Afghan wars that predate the conflict of this episode, which I've already talked about in my review of the Sherlock episode, The Great Game. Putting it simply, the events in this episode take place during the turning point of the Crimean War. The siege of Sevastopol, where this episode takes place primarily, can be seen as an allied victory against the Russian Empire when they sued for peace. Except in this episode, the Sontarans have mysteriously replaced all mentions of anything and everything Russian, curb stomping the British forces into the dirt. Mary Seacole materializes as coincidentally as the trio do, making me wonder why she was out here alone, essentially doing soldier's work.
Hey! Get away from him! Show me your hands! What did you take? Show me!
We didn't take anything.
Instead of having a large amount of nursing to do with all the injuries and deaths shown literally all around them. Returning to the British camp, the companions then started vanishing out of thin air, and I initially believed they were going for a cool Back to the Future kind of vibe until the Doctor explained it all away.
A collision between flux and vortex energy. You're falling through space and time.
Why Dan and Yaz ended up where they did remains to be seen. The show doesn't seem capable of entertaining the idea of the Doctor, and by extension the audience, not knowing what happened to the pair, nor the idea of the Sontarans meddling with the past having ripples in the present. More on that later. The Doctor tries to return to the TARDIS, but it is seemingly now capable of deleting doors as well as growing them. The Doctor checked into the British Hotel, where we found a general planning and drinking rum. Given that there are people arguing about which nurse held most significance between Mary Seacole and Florence Nightingale, I do appreciate that the episode did three things. Firstly, not representing Nightingale as the Thomas Edison party pooper of this episode. Secondly, acknowledging that Nightingale claimed in a letter to her brother-in-law that Mary Seacole would do some good and make many drunk. And thirdly, didn't let race become the episode's focal point, seeing as the Sontarans, as far as I'm aware, have nothing to do with racism. It is written in Mary Seacole's book, however, that racism was what prevented her attempt to join Nightingale's group. All this context made for great narrative roots in the story. They have this big reveal that the Sontarans have been here the whole time by showing that Russia and China have simply become Sontar. This evidently means that the Sontarans had travelled even further back in time to establish this state. It's not so far back in time though to suggest that the characters had forgotten Russia entirely. It gives the Sontarans almost Mongol Empire vibes, seemingly popping out of nowhere and swallowing nations whole. If you needed more evidence that the Sontarans were fans of the Mongols,
I wanted to ride a horse.
Oh, what a great line that was. There was also a rather effective interrogation scene with the Doctor and this Sontaran grunt that refused all help from Mary. I really liked how she used her gender to hide her own identity and get the Sontaran to lead her to his base. Dan Starkey's performance here was pretty great as well, admittedly doing what he always does, but still had me smiling at moments like these.
May death death rain down on you both. Human scum! You will be stamped beneath the boot of Sontar! At a future point to be determined!
It would seem on the surface like the Sontaran was conveniently kept here only to be released shortly afterwards, but the fact the General doesn't like Mary keeping him here makes his release more understandable. His immunity to interrogation prevents him from being an asset to the British as well. The pair followed the discharged patient to a hidden cave where all the Sontarans were preparing for battle. Mary's duty of care got swept under the rug here though, in favour of sitting for hours taking notes of what happens. She doesn't decide to do this herself, but the doctor, whom she met 15 minutes ago, asks her to do it. Without any questions or objections, Mary Seacole just became a note taker for the doctor whilst all her patients suffered and died in the British hotel. The next morning, the doctor blasted her sonic screwdriver megaphone to get the Sontaran's attention. She firstly reveals her identity to this commander character, and he in turn reveals that the Sontarans have developed psychic powers as they foresaw the Flux's arrival. This not only gave the scene in the previous episode some purpose, but it does all feel a little bit overkill considering the Sontarans can also time travel. Wait, why would they even need a psychic if they can time travel? I mean, at least they claimed not to be the creators or commanders of the Flux, aspects that are still left a mystery. I started feeling a bit troubled though when he started talking some more. He claimed that right before the Lupari brought up the planet-wide shield, they just zipped inside? Okay, fine, but there was also this.
Why Sebastopol?
The Crimean skirmish seems the perfect place to start. So much conflict, so much opportunity.
Yet they started years before this event. We saw it on the map with those nations stamped out of memory. Suddenly the fog cleared away for these two massive armies to become visible and they had a big battle. The doctor returned to Mary Seacole and once again, without any urge to return to nursing some soldiers back to health, she went along with the doctor's vague instructions and boarded a Sontaran ship. This was where the present and past timelines converged, so I'll just hop onto what happened in the present before going any further. We are treated to the first of many coincidental teleports that brought Dan back to his street in Liverpool. Things started getting murky when his neighbours gave him strange signs. One neighbour pointed at her watch, which somehow prompted Dan to turn around and see a giant Sontaran ship parked in the middle of the stadium. Had it not been for this line earlier,
A collision between flux and vortex energy. You're falling through space and time.
I would have naturally assumed the Sontarans had been ruling over the humans for over a century, and Dan being ejected back into the present day was time sorting itself out. Sontarans have travelled in time before in the show, but seeing as they aren't on the ground in the Halloween apocalypse, we can rule out the idea that the present was created because of them ruling over the Earth for a considerable amount of time. Therefore, I wonder why they felt the need to have multiple divisions of troops deployed in different timelines. Isn't there considerable risk that they might end up somehow fucking themselves over by doing this? Dan was then chased through the streets with more horrendously inaccurate shooting when another miraculous coincidence occurred, Dan's mum and dad appearing as though they were expecting him and took out two Sontarans with a wok and frying pan. It's hilarious that their positioning indicates them expecting him, but their dialogue says otherwise.
Where the hell have you been?
Afterwards, they're all seen in a car hiding from the Sontarans. Seeing as there are no broken windows, I'm guessing it belongs to the parents. This means they would have either driven out here during the curfew without this happening,
I'm sorry!
or they parked near Dan's street and hid for hours in case their son suddenly appeared in the street like he does. The mum then said that it's been 2 days since the last episode and that the Lupari shielded the Earth for 3 minutes and then fucked off. This being a nighttime setting doesn't clear up whether the Flux destroyed the sun or not. I'm assuming it didn't because they haven't all frozen to death, but given how much damage we saw the Flux create last week, it would be good to know how the sun got off so lightly without Lupari protection. They then arrived at the waterfront, which is supposed to be where the invasion originated. It was rather hilarious to me that after what would seem to be two strange statements from Dan,
Must have been the Carvanista ships. Yeah, well, I've had some experience of dealing with aliens these last few days.
he tells his parents to go home and they just do? Way to underwrite the bravery of these two characters going out into the night, smacking Sontarans looking for their son. The next scene has Dan overseeing an execution of some spies. I was thinking about how weighty this moment might have been had Dan's parents been caught and executed instead. I know it sounds a bit morbid, but it's just the fact these people who were killed are so undeveloped and get killed off screen that makes the whole scene just a laughing stock. We already had a great couple of moments showing just how extensively powerful this group of Sontarans are. This was just so pointless. If Dan had an emotional reaction to seeing this, then I could understand this being put in here, but he just stares at them like a piece of cardboard. No tears, no fear, nothing. He's then seen filming all the waterfront shit on his phone before climbing aboard a Sontaran ship without obstacle. This was where the two timelines converged, and it was all a bit cringe. The pair talking simultaneously despite barely knowing each other, the filming of himself on the ship shenanigans, all just so that the Doctor could figure out the Sontaran plan of having the Earth since the dawn of time. Why didn't the Sontarans just time travel there to begin with if that was their end game? Maybe they could only travel in time whilst planet bound. Maybe they can only time travel in increments of 170 years or so. What the Sontarans can and can't do in relation to time travel is never explained. Or maybe I watched the episode twice for this review and missed a very important piece of information. Or maybe they're just going to reveal it later in the series. I have no idea. Just in the nick of time before Dan was executed, Carvanista showed up to zap the Sontarans single-handedly. I see 3 blasts and 5 Sontarans. What the actual fuck? I want to call Deus Ex Machina here, but I am just so in love with this idea that there is a species of humanoid dogs looking out for humanity that I'm willing to overlook this rather convenient escape hatch. It took the Lupari 2 days to realise that they left prematurely, and poor Carvanista getting the blame gave further context for his resentment towards humans. The pair do have really good chemistry and jokes, but I still found the whole ram the Sontarans out of all timelines and locations thing to be super convenient. Are the Lupari smashing up other Sontaran sites across the globe whilst this is all happening? I guess there's always next week. Back at the hotel, the Doctor gave the Commander and Mary a big lecture on how to defeat the Sontarans. It was such a cringe fest, essentially watching her talk for 3 minutes straight, whilst giving Mary gold stars and having a good jab at the General for sending his men to die. All these drawings here were apparently done by Mary during her overly long note-taking session. How did she have enough light to draw in such detail? Even stranger to me was the idea that the Earth's atmosphere has damaging gases for the Sontarans. Sure, it gives them reason for gassing the entire planet 13 years ago, but I thought that was just to feed clones. Adding this detail raises one rather major question. Why would they ever take their helmets off if the Earth's atmosphere was so harmful to them? How did that Sontaran they had chained up earlier survive without a recharge? So they all go outside to empty the Sontaran's supply chain, which conveniently happens to be right at the tip of the legs that are planted into the Earth. Afterwards, the Doctor and the Commander are then seen just outside, somewhere foggy, without an acknowledgement of the conflict that should be ensuing right now. If this is what happens when the supply is drained out, surely this should be happening throughout the entire division, with troops dispatched to put the sabotage down. Instead,
We shall make a strategic withdrawal.
What? This was made even more frustrating by the General magically making a fuckload of explosive barrels appear beneath the ships, destroying them all with the gas they've just unloaded. Just like the barrels of dynamite appearing out of nowhere, the TARDIS also does the same thing. Not only that, but the front doors that previously went missing materialized because the Doctor did just the right amount of begging. She then grabs Dan for the cliffhanger of the episode, where they find the TARDIS has gotten even weirder than merely having extra doors. It only clicked with me just now that the TARDIS's interior design does have a very crystalline feel to it. This connection with the design of the Crystal siblings definitely made me suspicious of their involvement in this hijacking that took place. So let's talk about what happened on this episode's final front, shall we? The final coincidental teleports of the episode brought Vinda and Yaz to the Temple of Atropos. For some reason, she found the guy digging the Great Hole of 1820 here too. He seemed to have dementia or something, unable to even make conversation with Yaz, and wandered off without being seen again for the rest of the episode. I am not kidding, he is literally there for just over a minute, with Yaz being pulled away by that repetitive diamond-shaped voice thing.
Can you repair?
Yeah.
Oh man, I laughed so hard at this. When the hell did she have the time to write that down? I only seem to remember her using or even having a pen in her first fucking episode. Why would she need to write this down? Even though it was painfully obvious what this acronym stood for, they still felt the need to spell it out to us in a later scene. I guess Yaz doesn't wash her hands very much either. Disgusting. The pair then come together to do some repairs.
What do they want repairing?
I mean, those banisters have seen better days. It's not exactly clear yet what's going on with these lots, only that there are now 3 meanings to the word time. The planet they are on just happens to be called Time, and the beings within this room are preventing time as an evil force from being unrestricted and unleashed on the universe. The Crystal duo then appear with a third person named Passenger. This character had a rather Robert Strong kind of vibe, except without the jumbled or convenient backstory the other two have. I wonder if the Passenger has something to do with them kidnapping Diane from last week. This mental speculation that's going on in my brain about the character, I like very much. The 3 then went to where Yaz and Vinda were.
Can you repair?
Yes.
Sure. You got identification?
How did Yaz immediately suspect these 3 of foul play? The Doctor might, but she's not exactly here right now. She didn't seem to have a problem with the vanishing old man and Vinda, despite never meeting them before. Had they said, "Yes, we can repair, but we need you to step into that position and the task will be complete," it might have made for an interesting test as to whether these 2 characters are gullible enough to believe this stuff or are too easily trusting. Instead, they're just forced into these positions off screen. Vinda tries, shooting the siblings and they just teleport around for reasons that should be explained later down the line. The Doctor and Dan then arrived and Swarm clicked his fingers, and there's not really a lot else to say here until next week. So, did it suck? This episode was quite hit and miss. It's got a few moments here and there worth appreciating, but by the end I found myself frustrated and dissatisfied by the plot. The only aspect of the previous episode that had literally no involvement was the Claire character and the Weeping Angels. They did a great job of making the Sontarans appear powerful in the past, but are a bit of a laughingstock in the present day. I'm still quite lost by all the crystal shit. Mary Seacole felt very underused without sufficient characterization, and I can definitely say the same thing about Vinda and Dan's parents too. You can support the channel by making a pledge on my Patreon page, where you can get early access to reviews like this one, as well as exclusive content you won't find on YouTube. Thanks for watching, see you all next week. I'm feeling really pretentious today. I'm feeling really pretentious today. Given that there are people arguing about which nurse held most significance between Mary Seacole and Florence Nightingale, Mary's duty of care got swapped under the reg. Wow!